North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. Greetings, my name is John David Wells. We report the news, the real news. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out each. We make commentary. That's not the news. That's simply my opinion. And we debate all of those things. You can do that by joining us on the telephone, 817-379-2172, 817-379-2172. You can also join us via the chat room that's going on right now at YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch. So far, winning the chat room derby is the lovely Yvonne Field, who is a stalwart ally of the Wells Report. Yvonne has supported this broadcast since before I even moved to Dallas, Texas. It's been, and that, by the way, has been, what is it, Evie, 16 years? Yeah. Grandis Magnus Commentatus, says J.E. Thank you, my friend. Thank you so much. We've got a lot of news to cover today. And unfortunately, we're going to start with our news coverage by covering the news. Not the news, but the actual news media, which unfortunately is in the news again. In these United States, we find ourselves in a position where our mainstream media has decided to play politics. They think that playing politics is journalism, and they are wrong. The objective of journalism is to provide facts for the populace. It is not to provide another political point of view. I spend a lot of time opining on this broadcast. It is ostensibly a news broadcast. But because of the circumstances that I am currently in, this is a 3-hour broadcast. There are 3 one-hour broadcasts. We haven't figured out quite how to do the editing yet to be able to get those podcasts taken care of, but we are working on it. But I have 3 hours of work to do every single day. And I believe that there should be a discussion about the news, how it's derived, and just exactly what the aim or purpose of newscasting is all about. The reason I do that is not because I'm a media guy navel-gazing. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm trying to help you understand just exactly where the propaganda lines begin and end. And in order to do that, I've got to discuss my beliefs and opinions and so on and so on. And that's part of this news broadcast. But it is ostensibly a news broadcast. I always differentiate between the news and my opinion. It's essential that I do that so that you don't get confused. And if you ever do get confused, call me and ask me what the hell I'm talking about. 817-379-2172. One of the great things about this news broadcast, it's interactive. You can call the news anchor right at the desk and say, "Yo, JD, what's up?" As a matter of fact, I'll even put the call on the air. Be more than happy to help you out with that. 817-379-2172. So what am I talking about when I say that the news media is in the news? This has been brewing for the last few days, and I have essentially ignored it. And the reason I've ignored it is because it's completely unseemly. I'm kind of disgusted at where the news media is right now. Because they're giving up so much. One of the great things about being in the media is if you do that right, if you do news correctly, you are right there in the catbird seat of the first draft of history. You get to see all this stuff first. And you get to report on what you see right in front of you as history unfolds. In this particular case, this particular story that I'm discussing, I'm talking about the Queen of England and her passing. She, by the way, she is now lying in state at Westminster Hall in Westminster Abbey. Her funeral will be in a few days. But when I broadcast that coverage, when I cover that story, you're right there. You're right there as history unfolds. And you're watching King Charles. Everything he does is historic. And when you're reporting the news, and when that's your job, to be able to share that experience, to be able to describe it. I've stood right beside Westminster Hall, Westminster Abbey. I know exactly where those places are. I have walked Horse Guards Parade. I have seen Buckingham Palace, facing it. And when I see all these things, I know what's there. And I try to give that to you. But for whatever reason, news broadcasters of today will see something like that and then try to come up with some sort of really educated take, some nuance, something far beyond the obvious. And in this case, left-leaning media outlets like MSNBC, CNN, The Washington Post are devoting a third of their coverage of Queen Elizabeth II's death to discuss the British monarchy's history of racism and colonialism, in some cases, even calling for reparations. Okay, that is not the story. That is axe grinding. And I'm going to get to some of that axe grinding coming up here in just a couple of minutes, but let me go through the news here. This, by the way, from Fox News. CNN's chief international anchor, Christiane Amanpour, was one of several on-air personalities to bring up reparations in the wake of Queen Elizabeth's passing. She also suggested King Charles III should address Britain's colonial legacy. She said, quote, "I really do believe we have to have this conversation right now, even at this moment," she said of British colonialism as she began her analysis. Amanpour appeared to suggest that claims by King Charles about various demographics flourishing in recent history under British rulers were overblown. She said this was true particularly in the wake of Black Lives Matter and particularly in the protests that erupted all over the world after what happened in Minnesota, here as well, in France and other parts of these nations that had colonial servants. Let's face it. What we're saying is that there's a generation of multicultural and diverse Britons who want this answered, who want to see their monarch finally talk about what it means and, potentially the idea of reparations. Definitely justice, right? Justice, she said. During an appearance on MSNBC, Birmingham City University professor Kehinde Andrews admitted he was not sad about the Queen's death because of the ways in which she exemplified white supremacy and colonialism. He further claimed that one of the reasons the Queen was so popular was because she was a throwback to those colonial times. Quote, "This is somebody who represented white supremacy and colonialism and, as you said, didn't give reparations, didn't give up her wealth, didn't give up her power. She reveled in it. I'm not exactly sure why I should be sad today, and millions of us in this country have exactly the same feelings with me, I would say." MSNBC political strategist Richard Stengel said Americans are mainly captivated with the British royals because they have a weakness that yearns for a time of hereditary privilege. I have to say in your earlier question, this is a quote, "I have to say to your earlier questions, why are American news networks dedicating all of this time to Queen Elizabeth's funeral? I think it's a good question," said Stengel. I mean, it's something. There's a weakness in the American character that still yearns for that era of hereditary privilege, which is the very thing that we escape from, unquote. Discussion about the monarchy's troubled history grew tense during a conversation between British historian Andrew Roberts and MSNBC host Ali Velshi. Roberts took issue with Velshi's segment opening, where he claimed that many were tired of the British monarchy and now view it as a relic of colonial oppression. He claimed upwards of 85% in the UK are in favor of a constitutional monarchy and called Velshi's comments extremely overdone. Velshi scolded, "Andrew, this is not a propaganda show." Oh, really? Sorry, that was just my opinion. I need you to stop for a second. Are you really taking issues with the horrors of colonialism, Andrew? This typifies exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to what is being identified as journalism in the United States. The story is not colonialism. The story is the death of Queen Elizabeth II. And so what's happening is this story, a poignant end of a sovereign, is now being hijacked by some supposed journalist with an axe to grind about colonialism. Was he the product of colonialism? I don't believe so. Let's assume from his name that he is from, say, for example, India. Was that a product of British colonialism? Yes. Yes, it was. And there needs to be a discussion, not of reparations, a discussion about what the British Empire actually gave to the countries that they conquered. And that is being left out of this. I mean, if you're going to go down this road, if you're going to say somehow that the Queen is diminished because of white privilege, it's not white privilege. It is privilege born of thousands of years of royal family management of the countries around them, mainly their estates, which grew into countries. And the question is not whether or not these people suffered horribly under British colonialism. The question is whether or not they also thrived under British colonialism. And that is an important question and an important discussion to have. So let's have it. The Roman Empire had most of North Africa, all the way to the Suez, all the way through Europe. And what they did was they brought, totalitarian rule in some respects. But they also brought civilization and laws and language and arts, architecture, public works. They also, I dare say, brought military traditions that we carry on to this very day. Likewise, the British Empire, able to project power as the world's, let's argue it, the world's first incredibly worldwide superpower, they were able to project power. Now, did some of their work create damage for a lot of people? Yes. But what's the balance? Of the work of the British Empire, how much of it was horrible and terrible and awful and rotten and deserves reparations? I dare say a very small amount, frankly. We'll talk more about this when we continue. You're listening to The Wells Report. By the way, your thoughts perfectly welcome on this broadcast. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. So when we talk about the lamestream media, which, by the way, is a term I coined years and years and years ago, a lot of people use it now, but okay, I never heard it before I started using it, and suddenly people are using it, so I should have gotten some money for that, shouldn't I? I should have, trademarked it or something. Anyway, another big hunk of money slipping through my fingers. Anyway, I am not standing for the abuses of colonialism, but I am pointing out that there is a certain level of, shall we say, enlightenment isn't exactly the word that I want to use, but I'll use it because I can't think of the other one. There's a certain level of enlightenment, education, actual progress of civilization that comes when there is a group of people that can project power and then go out in the world and actually take control of various countries. Now, we don't like the fact that someone can come along and take control of your country. I get it. I understand that. That is empire building. But that's what the British Empire was. That is how they did business. And the British Empire went to all corners of the globe bringing British law, British traditions, British understandings of civilization, art, again, architecture, science, all throughout the world. We cannot go back the hundreds of years that the British Empire has existed and say, okay, what would have happened in these countries? We can surmise. We talked about India earlier today. What about India? A teeming population of people who believe, and this is not intended to be critical in any way, shape, or form. But it seems to me that Hinduism values everything as sacred except people. And so my concern about all of this is a circumstance that says, okay, how would that country have succeeded if the British had never shown up? Now, strangely, the only country that we have that we can use as an analog is probably Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a country that refuses to be civilized in any way, shape, or form by any civilization that's come there. As a matter of fact, Afghanistan is where civilizations go to die. That is the legend, and probably quite true. But the point of all of this, the point of this entire segment is to say, you know, the story, the actual news, is what we should be discussing. We should be discussing the stories of the news. The downstream effect of those stories, certainly fodder for discussion, but not during a news broadcast. You know, the Christian Amanpour I Hate Everything show, for example. There's also something else you need to keep in mind. And this is something that I've also said, this leftist media, you know, right now they hate Republicans. Give them time. If you give them time, they'll hate everything. They just are focused on, say, for example, anything that turns the United States away from a socialist, totalitarian society, because that's what they think it ought to be. Now, if it actually becomes that, then they'll say, my gosh, we have to have freedom and liberty. And that's the way it ought to be. Because that's what these people are. They're chronically unsatisfied, and they want to crap on everything that isn't them. That's my opinion, just sharing it with you on the Wells Report. We'll be back with more coming up in just a couple of minutes. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. Stay put. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. There are an awful lot of people. We were just talking about the British Empire. There are an awful lot of people around the world that have never, ever actually experienced what they're talking about. Talking about how terrible British colonialism was. And how the countries, I guess, were damaged. Yeah, like Canada. Australia. Is that what we're talking about here? India is thriving. Is it because they just follow the British playbook? No. It's not because it's because they took what they brought and had conflict with the British Empire. They brought what they had in their civilization and combined it with what the British Empire brought them. And for them, and I certainly would expect that this would be the case, the combination is better than either of the two separately. Australia, until leftist politicians took over, another thriving republic, having just an absolutely wonderful time. Canada speaks for itself. The only problem with Canada is that they have decided that it's okay to have an enclave of French Canadians and then the rest of Canada. And that creates a tension between the two cultures. And they are two different cultures. They absolutely are. But that's not something that Britain brought Canada. The simple case of the matter is that there are lots of great countries out there that thrive because they were exposed to British civilization. And I would dare say that the benefits of the British Empire far outweighed the criminal aspects, of which there were many, I guarantee it. But still, let's try to keep this in perspective. Let's cover the story. The story is a great sovereign of 70 years has passed away, currently lying in state in Westminster Hall. She will be buried in a few days. King Charles is now the king. Something that he has waited for an equal number of years. And now we will see what happens with this empire. But to force it to look back into history, into some area that they can't do anything about, and somehow hold them responsible for what? Spreading culture, art, law, civilization from one end of the country to the other? Really? That's a problem, huh? Well, what about the people who were there? Okay, well, let's talk about the people that were there. A few Britons in ships were able to come and take control of their country. What does that tell you about the country? Let's come right home with this. Let's come right home with this. Great Britain was Great Britain when people in the North American continent were living in animal skin tents, wearing animal skin as clothing. Britain was sailing from one end of the world to the other end of the world when people on the North American continent were paddling around lakes in animal skin canoes. Now, were the people that we found here on this continent, were they valuable people? Yes, they were. Were they treated badly? Certainly. Should they have some of these treaties reinforced? Yes. Yes, they should. If I ever have a chance to affect any of it, I'm going to force the United States government to actually take a look at what they've done with Native Americans with regards to blowing up treaties that they signed with these people. I'm going to say, okay, which one of these are you going to now honor that you broke? Those are not reparations. That is contractual law. And I'm going to see that they either have the property that they bargained for or make an arrangement with people who now have that property so that they are made whole because the United States government broke treaties with them. You see, this is when a colonial power becomes evil. It's one thing to be a colonial power, take over a country, and then say, okay, this is your country too. Let's all work together to make this a better country. Here's what we're bringing to the table. What do you guys bring to the table? Actually, that happened when we first came to North America. The Indians taught the Pilgrims how to grow food. That is a perfect example of what I'm talking about here. Now look, what would this country be if it wasn't for European colonialism? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. That's where it would be. So we have to start looking at this with some kind of reality, don't you think? All right, let's move on. The President of the United States yesterday, in an amazing display of tone-deaf craziness, I actually typed on the chat room, which I spend a lot of time in. I typed in the chat room, "This is weird." Because the President of the United States was talking about the Inflation Reduction Act with about 1,000 handpicked people. James Taylor singing 60s songs and 70s songs. And, those crazy days of the what? Anyway, the kids, the young people are going, who's this guy? Does anybody know who James Taylor is? Anyway, they're celebrating this Inflation Reduction Act, which is actually the skinny Green New Deal. And what they were talking about is how finally we were able to stick it to the special interests. And that's just about the way he said it. Meanwhile, the Dow Jones Industrial Average crashed 1,200 points. Worse for the S&P 500, worse for NASDAQ, worse for all the major indicators. The economy has prices 8.3% higher than the economy had 1 year ago, and outrageously high when you go back 2 years ago. And meanwhile, this guy's celebrating a bill named the Inflation Reduction Act, which is nothing more than the Green New Deal, but the Inflation Reduction Act that isn't going to do anything about inflation until 2035. 2035. So what were they celebrating? Well, they were celebrating sticking it to those special interests. And in that same speech, he started talking about good union labor. I'm sorry, the Democrats have had the near uninterrupted support of big labor for a century. Okay? And that good union labor, doesn't that also mean that that is a really good special interest? Yes, it does. Yeah, big labor is a special interest group. So in other words, it's not that they stuck it to special interests finally. It's that they stuck it to special interests that weren't their special interests. And there's another special interest. And that would be environmentalists. Environmentalism is a special interest group. In Fox News today, this, by the way, is one of their exclusives. Major environmental organizations are quietly playing a key role in the Biden administration's foreign policy efforts, according to emails reviewed by Fox News. The emails underscore the influence that left-wing environmentalists have on the Biden administration through Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry. Here is this guy one more time. He's never been a part of the American government without damaging it, including when he was a soldier in Vietnam. On multiple occasions since President Biden took office nearly 20 months ago, green groups have acted as an apparent go-between for the administration on key international climate negotiations. This, according to emails obtained in an information request by watchdog group Protect the Public Trust and shared with Fox News. Emails show correspondence between environmental groups and Jesse Young, a senior advisor in Kerry's office. They offer a rare peek into Kerry's office, which has largely been tight-lipped about its international and internal operations. Quote, the Department of State's leadership in combating the global climate crisis is supported by diplomats, negotiators, and subject matter experts with diverse backgrounds and decades of knowledge and experience from the public sector, academia, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, special interests, and the private sector. This according to State Department spokesperson talking to Fox News. On March 8th, 2021, Young mailed Alden Meyer, a senior associate at the environmental group E3G, and climate policy consultants at Performance Partners and other Green Group leaders, giving them information about Kerry's travel and asking them for their position on a leadership change at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. At the time, former Australian government official Matthias Cormann had emerged as a favorite for the OECD's Secretary General position. Meyer responded saying the groups were weighing in on the Cormann front, and forwarded a message from Green groups. He also copied a series of other environmental leaders and added that he would brief Young in greater detail during tomorrow's kitchen cabinet briefing, an apparent reference to an off-the-books group that meets to advise administrative officials. Quote, our analysis is that unless the U.S. can be persuaded not to go for Cormann, he will get the job, the message stated. It's coming down to the wire, and this is about drawing a line in the sand and saying anyone with a history of blocking climate action must be disqualified from senior international appointments. Wow. In response to Meyer's email, Jake Schmidt, the senior strategic director for the Natural Resources Defense Council's International Climate Program, said the U.S. needed to quickly use its influence in the OECD to support another candidate. The Australian bloke is horrible and shouldn't be put in charge of such an important role, said Schmidt. Making climate an essential element of foreign policy means that climate change needs to be at the top of all decisions. OECD members ultimately appointed Cormann to the position a week later. Cormann, though, selected James Rubin, a foreign policy advisor to Biden, State Department official, Kerry presidential campaign advisor, and lobbyist, who terminated his lobbying registrations to join the Biden administration, according to the New York Times, to serve as a top deputy. As a climate change think tank, E3G regularly seeks to educate and inform a broad range of stakeholders in our research into the impacts and solutions to climate change, which represents the most significant threat to the health, prosperity, and well-being of everyone on this planet. Does it really? So, environmentalism, environmental groups have direct connections to the Biden administration, or whoever's running the Biden administration. Now, green groups have been around in Europe affecting politics in those countries for years and have badly damaged all of them. Germany is the one that immediately leaps to the top of the list. Germany finally said, okay, we're done with you guys, and moved forward. But it took them about 20 years. I don't believe that somebody's harebrained scheme that warm weather is bad is worth entirely changing the political makeup of the United States of America. As I've said time and time and time again, the only thing wrong with warm weather, even excessively warm weather, The only thing that is something that is a real threat to civilization is women wandering around without wearing bras in halter tops. That is a sincere problem when it comes to climate change. But otherwise, people travel thousands of miles nearly every month to go someplace warm. Hello. No, what this is something that I'm going to discuss in just a couple of moments. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this green movement and who it is. It's right there in front of you. You could probably figure out where I'm going to go with this. But if you can't, I suggest you stay put. Back with more of the Wells Report in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. We bring you the news. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out both. I make commentary, not the news. And we debate. We're talking a little bit about this entire climate change garbage. It is garbage. Everybody's saying, my God, all the ice in Greenland is going to melt. And it's going to raise the ocean level and flood 86,000 acres of really good American real estate. No, it's not. They were trying to put out the notion that Greenland ice melting had raised the ocean a significant amount. And the thing about it is what you have to understand is Greenland used to be green. That's why it has been named Greenland. Okay, so this is going to get into some celestial physics here. The Earth is canted about 23 degrees. It rotates on that axis about 23 degrees. But that axis is not perfectly balanced because the planet isn't perfectly balanced. The balance of the Earth actually pronates. And that pronation is in a 20,000 year cycle. So, in other words, the angle of the Earth on its axis sort of changes from time to time. And there are climate implications because of this alteration in the angle of the Earth on its rotation. They are very, very sure that that particular alteration, that pronation, is responsible for the medieval ice age because things got really, really cold. And when that circle traces all the way around to the same point where the medieval ice age was, and like I said, it's about a 20,000 year cycle, there will be another medieval ice age. What we are seeing is not the damn humans on this planet are destroying it. They're making it hotter. If we're making it hotter, it's because we're no longer polluting our atmosphere to keep sunlight from hitting it. No, we're not doing anything to damage this planet. We're not. And there are people saying, baloney, we are damaging this planet. No, we're not. I mean, if we are damaging this planet, would the planet be better off if we weren't here? Yes. Wait a minute. Yes, wait a minute. Because if we weren't here, who would care what this planet was doing or not doing, or what kind of shape it was in? I mean, do we hear from the people of Venus very often and talk about how terrible their planet is? No, because there aren't any. How about Martians? Do we hear from the Martians about how terrible their planet is and how much damage they did to their planet? No, because they didn't do any damage to their planet, because as far as we know, there was never an industrial civilization on Mars to destroy it. So where's all this coming from? Every single bit of this climate crisis they keep talking about is fomented by politicians from one end of the globe to the other. It's fascinating, actually. When you start thinking about it, it's actually pretty impressive that most of the politicians, certainly in the world that we're aware of, really honestly have united on this idea that we can fleece our populations with huge taxes if we can just convince them that the sky is actually falling. The sky is not falling. It is not. But I'll tell you what's being damaged. When we just told you a story about a guy who was perceived as being not someone who is friendly to climate change swindles, being put in charge of an important climate change swindling organization. And so what is really damaging is what they do to, say, for example, the Constitution. It's an emergency. We have to suspend the Constitution. It's an emergency. We have to fleece the American people of even more money, even though there have been crises in the past that have led this government, our government, to be $30.8 trillion in national debt. You see, if politicians, and they're the only ones spending the money, by the way, if politicians hadn't spent $30.8 trillion, maybe they'd have enough money to be able to fight climate change without coming to us and asking us to empty our pockets so that they can pursue their political delirium. If I'm going to spend tax money on anything, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to spend tax money on much more efficient air conditioning systems. I'm going to spend my money on, oh, I don't know, learning how to live on the water. Actually, we have a lot of technology on that. You know what? We call them ships. This whole thing is just plain a swindle. That's all it is. And it's worldwide. And they quote each other to say, well, if we're swindling, then so is everybody else. Exactly. That's exactly what you're doing. And it's awful. This is the Wells Report. We'll be back with more next hour. Join us, please. Okay. And I'll see you in a little bit. All right. Thanks very much for being with us today. North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. What do? We report the news. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We make commentary. That is opinion and not the news. And we debate. Also opinion and not the news. But essential to the future of this nation. And what we do is we make sure that you have information that you can use. To do what with, John? What do you want us to do? I want you to make superb decisions in the voting booth. I want you to make superb decisions in the voting booth. You can't do that if you only get one side of the story. You can't. Now, the story can be leavened with experience. I have a lot of that. And yes, when I make commentary, I'm using that opinion, experience to form an opinion that I'm sharing with you. But that's not the news. No, the news is what happened today. And it's essential that we have a good grasp of it. That's why when news is warped, when news is twisted to suit a political initiative or some kind of idea that becomes more important than what you think or what you believe of this particular fact, that's when things begin to go dangerously awry. And that's why we try to combat that every single day here on the Wells Report, and I hope you appreciate that and understand it. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Okay. All right. By the way, there is something that happened today. Off the subject, I know, but have you gotten any comments on the pillow guy getting swarmed at the hamburger stand and his phone confiscated by the FBI? Okay. Now, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. What they're talking about is Mike Lindell. He is my pillow. He has my pillow and my coffee and my this and my that and so on and so forth. And by the way, before we go any further, even though I'm not being paid to tell you this, I sleep on Mike Lindell's products. I do. I've got a mattress topper that is fantastic. I sleep on his sheets. I dry myself with his towels. Those products are just plain great. And oh, by the way, there's something else. Maybe you don't know this, but years and years and years ago, I broke my neck. Don't do this. It's bad for you. I'm a professional. I know what I'm talking about. I've had two cervical spine surgeries, and they are no flippin' fun. They are not. And the results of those injuries, at least the first surgery that I had, left me with serious problems. And those problems were healed by Dr. David Rothbard of Spine Team Texas. And essentially, I don't know what it would have been like if I had not broken my neck and gotten to this age, but it couldn't be much different than this. But I will tell you something. I spent hundreds upon hundreds of dollars on pillows so I could sleep at night with this surgically rebuilt spine, this cervical spine of mine. And I got to be perfectly honest with you, the best pillow I've ever slept on, Mike Lindell's, my pillow. I have two of them. By the way, I got the firm ones. I got the second most firm pillow that he has. They're perfect. Okay. Now, why am I telling you this? Because I'm certainly not getting paid for it. I'm not. I don't have an agreement. I used to have an agreement with him, but I don't have an agreement with Mike Lindell or My Pillow. But I tell you, those products are really, really good. And while I don't agree with everything that Mike Lindell believes in and stands up for and does all of these things, I believe in the fact that he is one hell of an American doing exactly what he should, which is to talk about the things that he thinks are important. And so what happened today is he was going to Hardee's, get himself a burger. He pulls into the parking lot. FBI agents pull their cars in front of him. They walk up to him. They hand him a subpoena. They say, "We're taking your cell phone." And they took his cell phone. Okay? So I heard that he had been raided. That is not the case. But I will tell you that Mike Lindell was visited by the FBI today. He was handed a subpoena, and so on. As a matter of fact, you know what I should do? I think what I'm going to do right now is I was going to talk about something else, but this is important because, and this is a good thing, and Ann, I appreciate this, but you're essentially hijacking the show, but it's okay. I agree with you this time. So hang on a second, Mike. My microphone is going crazy. Mike Lindell. Here. Let's see. We have our choice. We can talk about this story from the Washington Post or CNN or The Guardian or USA Today. Let's see. I wonder which of those is less biased. Suppose I could do The Guardian, but that's pretty leftist. But let's go offshore, okay? Let's go to The Guardian. All right. So let's give you this story while we're at it. All right. Mike Lindell, the pillow salesman who became an enthusiastic mouthpiece for Donald Trump's. Okay, this is what they write. Donald Trump's lie about a stolen election. Okay. All right. So maybe that's not. Do you want to go to a different? Okay, we'll just stay here. Has said he was forced to hand his phone to FBI agents who surrounded him at a fast food drive-thru. The incident happened on Tuesday. That was yesterday. He is the chief executive of MyPillow, was in line at a branch of Hardee's in Mankato, Minnesota. That's his hometown. Following a hunting trip, cars pulled up in front of us, to the side of us, behind us, and I said those are either bad guys or the FBI. Now, they refer to him as a conspiracy theorist. No, he's not a conspiracy theorist. He has a different point of view. But isn't it fascinating how the objective of journalism is to shame, diminish, damage, character assassinate anybody who disagrees with the current orthodoxy? In this particular case, it's the 2020 election. If you disagree with the current orthodoxy, you can get your butt kicked. Anyway, that's what's going on. Cars pulled up. It turns out they were the FBI, not bad guys. By the way, I'm just pointing out that the Guardian calling him a conspiracy theorist is kind of a nasty put down, don't you think? I mean, not that conspiracy theory is something that you should be nastily put down for, but let me explain something to you. When you purposefully ignore reality in order to have a conspiracy, you're kind of a jerk. And we call you a conspiracy theorist for a reason, but Mike Lindell, I think that's heavy-handed. And so that's just my opinion. Let's keep moving. Lindell said the agents questioned him about Tina Peters, a fellow election denier, facing criminal charges in Colorado for tampering with voting machinery as a county clerk, and who in June lost a Republican primary to become the state's top election official. Now, let me make something abundantly clear. Anybody messing with voting machines is a criminal. It makes no difference what their party is. They're criminals. That's just the way that is. Lindell campaigned for Peters, who in May says she was removed by a judge from running elections in Mesa County. Well, if you start trying to be elected, you can't run an election. You can't do that. An FBI spokesperson confirmed agents were, quote, at the location executing a search warrant authorized by a federal judge, but would not give other details. That's fine. Lindell, a close Trump ally, is one of the loudest proponents, and here they go again, of Trump's false claims that his 2020 defeat by Joe Biden was rigged, and has been widely ridiculed for his frequent claims that he has enough evidence to see Trump reinstated to the presidency. Has anybody asked him to show it? Has he gotten a public hearing? Should there indeed be some form of trial? Some form of investigation to see if he's talking through his hat? You see, I think there should be. Getting back to opinion, we go over there. Yeah, I see. I think there should be. I think there actually should be an honest to goodness, let's have some form of trial. Not that there's any criminal intent here. But let's have somebody put their evidence up, and let's have somebody put their evidence up, and let's hash it out somewhere, and let's make a decision. Why don't we do that? Why haven't we done that? You want to hear my opinion? Here's why we haven't done it. Because the people who believe that the 2020 election was perfect don't want anything to disturb that story. They don't want anything to disturb that story, even if it's true. I'm not saying it is, but we don't know. We don't know. Let's have this conversation. Let's have this conversation. Let's have this debate. I mean, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with actually putting down the evidence on the table and seeing what's what? Now, whether we come up with a decision in one way or another on the 2020 election, that's immaterial. The point is that we haven't had that. Why? There are a whole bunch of people that say there were problems. There are a whole bunch of people that said that the people that say there are problems are jerks. Okay, so you're now Georgia said that there were no problems. Period. Okay, that's great. But let's have this discussion. Why not? Why not? Because I got to tell you something, if and I'm not saying there was, but if there was a problem, if we don't have this investigation and we don't chase this down and we don't look at Mike Lindell's evidence that he says is absolutely indisputable, if we don't look at all this stuff, then what's left? What's left is we don't know. We don't know one way or another. We just pick up the orthodoxy and say, this is it. That's the way it is. You see, I'm not trying to give you misinformation about anything. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give you facts to let you make some sort of decision about them. Okay? You know, as far as I'm concerned, Joe Biden is the president of the United States. Okay? He was elected in 2020, and that's that. Now, if something else comes up, fine, we'll discuss it then. Should something else come up? Yeah, I think we ought to have this national debate. I think we actually ought to figure this stuff out. But who's going to do it? I mean, as we've just seen with The Guardian, they're all in on Trump's ridiculous election lie. And they say it every single time. Why would you have to say it? Why would you have to say it? Unless you're trying to make sure that everybody knows that if they disagree, they're going to get hurt. Okay? Which is why they stopped Mike Lindell, maybe? I'm just saying. This is this is confusing and concerning to me. Why is the FBI involving itself in state election politics? I sure would like to have an answer to that question, wouldn't you? This is the Wells Report. Back with more in a moment. Stay where you are. You are listening to the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Talking about Mike Lindell, we just decided to jump into this story. Mike Lindell, in case you don't know, was stopped at a Hardee's in Mankato, Minnesota by the FBI. They handed him a subpoena. I don't know what the subpoena was for. They handed him a subpoena probably for a deposition of some kind, maybe, I don't know. And then they took his cell phone. And I don't know why they did that either. Okay? Now, we know that Mike Lindell is a close Trump ally, and we know that Mike Lindell has done an awful lot of work to try to disprove the results of the 2020 presidential election. How much has he tried to do that? Well, he admitted earlier this month he spent up to $40 million of his own money in that pursuit, including underwriting lawsuits in numerous states to try to eliminate voting machines he insists were to blame for Trump's defeat. There is, and then they jump into this, there is no evidence to support his allegations. Lindell has lost numerous legal challenges over machines manufactured by Smartmatic and Dominion. In fact, he has been sued for defamation by Dominion Voting Systems, or actually a Dominion Voting Systems employee who claimed that Lindell was engaged in efforts to undermine faith in American democracy and enrich himself in the process. Enrich himself. Exactly what does that mean? Because we just reported that he lost $40 million of his own money in this pursuit. How's he enriching himself? Publicity? Is that what they're talking about? Yeah. Undermine faith in American democracy. I don't think we're really having a problem with American democracy. I believe what Mike Lindell is doing, and might be more beneficial to your lawsuit, is trying to undermine faith in your machines, specifically Dominion voting systems. It's not American democracy they're talking about. It's the systems it's the voting machines you make. That's what they're talking about. We need to make sure that we cut to the actual fact. You know, when I say I make analysis for fact and bias, that's one of these facts that just sort of gets glossed over. My God, he's trying to undermine faith in American democracy. No. If he's doing anything, he's trying to undermine faith in Dominion voting machines. Okay, which, by the way, goes with your lawsuit. And by the way, I keep hoping that Dominion actually gets into court. I hope they get into court. I do. You know why? Because in that court process, we're going to find out one way or another about how Dominion voting machines work. We should know how they work, by the way. They're voting machines. Don't you think? We should actually know how they work. We know how a pencil and a dot, you fill in the dot with the pencil, and you voted for that particular person or thing. Okay, so now we have these fancy schmancy machines. How do they work? Well, we can't tell you that because it's trade secrets. Okay, so you're now suing somebody. When you get into court, you're going to have to explain how those voting systems work. There won't be any debate about it. You'll have to do it. Are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure you want to do this? Okay. And so that's why I don't think we're actually seeing any of these trials moving forward. Because they really don't want to go to trial. They just basically want to bleed the people that they're trying to bleed until they give up and they settle. Don't settle. See it through. Get to court. Because if the Dominion voting machines are perfect, that's fine. Then we'll have faster elections. If they're not, well, we'll see then, won't we? This is the Wells Report. We'll be back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. This broadcast is fully independent of everything, including a paycheck for its host. I have convinced my wife, Susan, to continue subsidizing this broadcast for the balance of the year. I don't know how much longer beyond the end of the year that we're going to be able to do this, because I need this to be a paying proposition. And this is why I'm coming to you looking at this going, okay, so look, we report the news fairly, balanced, and truthfully. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out both. We point out when news is propaganda. And what we end up doing is we end up coming up with a collection of facts that are intended for you to have more truth at the end of the broadcast than at the beginning. In order to do that, what I've been doing over the years is working for a radio station and basically using the show I do for them as this particular effort. They subsidize the Wells Report, and I do it and share it with you for free. Unfortunately, I'm not in that position right now. And I would very much like to continue doing this broadcast because nobody's doing anything like what we do here. So, what do you need? What, if you have any interest in this whatsoever, and I'm not presumptuous in any way, I will ask you to do the following. If you think the show has value, share it with your friends. Ask them to subscribe to it. Throw some likes at me. There's a little like button right where you are. Just throw a like. Just do that. Pass this show around to your friends. We're going to have to build this one from the ground up. So pass this around. If you think it's valuable, if you think it sucks, just keep doing what you're doing. Okay? Because I assure you that eventually it will simply fade away. However, if you think it's worth something and you want to support it, pass it around to your friends. Ask them to subscribe. Give me a thumbs up. And if you want to put your money where my mouth is, you can do that too. You can go to patreon.com/The Wells Report, and you can make a contribution to this broadcast, which I would appreciate. We're making about $40 a month. And we got one lump sum donation from a dear friend of the Wells Report. And so all of that is absolutely welcome. Is it enough? No. So if you think this is worthwhile, let's keep working at it, okay? All right, once again, patreon.com/The Wells Report. I would sincerely appreciate your support of this broadcast. This was something that I was going to talk about before we talked about Mike Lindell. Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan warned the Supreme Court risks its legitimacy when it makes sweeping changes to law that overturn existing precedent. Here's what she writes. She says, quote, "Judges create legitimacy problems for themselves when they instead stray into places where it looks like they're an extension of the political process or when they're imposing their own personal preferences," Kagan said. She was doing a live stream event in New York. It happened Monday, and it was reported by the Associated Press. Kagan's comments came just a few months after the Supreme Court took the controversial steps of overturning Roe v. Wade, the landmark abortion ruling. And listen to how they describe this on Fox News. The landmark abortion ruling that expanded access to the procedure in all 50 states. That is the way you report the story. You don't report the story by saying that created the constitutional right to an abortion in all 50 states, which is what virtually everybody else is reporting this as. That is incorrect. More about that in a second. Justice Kagan's warning was similar to the dissent she joined in that case, which accused the majority of replacing the rule of law with judicial preference. The majority thereby substitutes a rule by judges for the rule of law, the opinion by Kagan and Justices Stephen Breyer and Sonia Sotomayor read. But Kagan, who was nominated to the nation's highest court by President Barack Obama in 2010, insisted that she was not referring to any specific ruling or string of rulings during her remarks, instead arguing the public has a right to expect, quote, that changes in personnel don't send the entire legal system up for grabs, unquote. Okay. So let me take you through a couple of things here that I think you might be interested in. This is the Constitution of the United States. It's Article 5, the amendment process. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by Congress. Does that say anything about the Supreme Court making a ruling on a point of law that establishes an amendment to the Constitution? I don't hear that in any of that text. That's Article 5 of the Constitution. What is the Supreme Court supposed to do? The Supreme Court is supposed to interpret laws based on the Constitution. The Supreme Court of the United States cannot amend the Constitution. Therefore, they cannot create a right for anything because there's a procedure. There's a procedure to do it. And none of those procedures have anything to do with the Supreme Court of the United States. So, forgive me, but when I'm talking about Justice Kagan, Stephen Breyer, Sonia Sotomayor, who are complaining that the majority of the Supreme Court of the United States substitutes a rule by judges for the rule of law, well, it's because they're not actually, she's not arguing the actual point. The actual point is that nowhere in the Constitution does it allow for the Supreme Court to create a right out of thin air. The Supreme Court does not create rights. The Supreme Court interprets the Constitution. Now, you haven't been told that story except here, because the mainstream media wants to foment hate and miscontent among the populace. The divide and conquer thing. Okay? Now, Langston asks this question. Can the Supreme Court of the United States determine a constitutional right of who can wed? The answer is no. No, they cannot. No. And that's because of the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, which, by the way, I read the last time this came up, Langston. I don't know if you noticed it or not. That unless there is something in the Constitution of the United States or something that prohibits a state from doing something in the Constitution of the United States, anything not described in the Constitution goes to the states. That's in the Constitution. It's Amendment 10. Get it? So you see, no. The Supreme Court of the United States cannot create same-sex marriage. Can't do it. And, when you consider the First Amendment of the Constitution, that's pretty straightforward too, by the way. The Congress shall make no laws governing practice of religion or creating a religion by virtue of the fact that the Supreme Court of the United States, for whatever reason, would thus create this vaporous right out of nothingness, except their own lofty opinions, is not something they can do. You have to go through a constitutional amendment to do that. Now, am I against constitutional amendment for same-sex marriage? No. No, I'm not. What I'm against is the court just deciding that there is one. If we're going to do any of that, let's run it through the legislature, okay? So that we're actually involved, we the people at the top of the Constitution. Let's do it that way. How about that? Okay? And what about this contraception thing? I don't care how fancy your black robe is. I don't care. But to be perfectly honest with you, it's really none of your business whether I have children or not. Period. And therefore, anybody that's concerned about contraception as vis-a-vis the Supreme Court of the United States, don't worry about it. It's not going anywhere. So Justice Kagan is decrying the fact that she's worried about the Supreme Court being political. Well, Justice Kagan, may I suggest that you may want to be less political if you don't want the Supreme Court of the United States to be thought of as political. There are lead pipe cinch determinations by the court where the decision should be 9-0. And I dare say that Roe v. Wade was one of them. She argues against what Roe v. Wade actually did, which was it substituted a rule by judges for the rule of law. It's worse, substituted a rule by judges for a constitutional amendment. You can't do that. For all kinds of just plain practical reasons, you can't do that. Where are the people represented in the Roe v. Wade decision? The answer is nowhere. All I'm asking is that the people be involved. This is our country. We should make those decisions. Now, what she's also saying is that changes in personnel among the Supreme Court, she's worried about whether or not that becomes more political. Well, the court's ideological makeup shifted dramatically under the administration of President Donald Trump. 3 of his nominees confirmed to the Supreme Court during his 4 years in office. The confirmation secured a 6-3 conservative majority in the Supreme Court. It's actually 5-4 because you never know what Chief Justice John Roberts is going to do. That, by the way, set the stage for the overturning of Roe, which stood as precedent for nearly 50 years. And that's something else. When Justice Kagan argues that you should not overturn precedent, if the precedent is a mistake, okay, then it cries out to be overturned. In the case of Roe v. Wade, it was just plain unconstitutional. It should have been a 9-0 decision on that basis. But there were 3 justices that wanted to play politics with it. 3. There is no way for them to determine what a constitutional right is. It's not their job. It's not their job. All right, so let's see. Integrating schools, Brown versus Board of Education. Just asking. Yeah, integrating schools. That was a law, but that's not a right. That was a decision in a court where it belonged. If we let the states determine marriage laws, individuals could lose their benefits if the spouse dies in a different state or have the marriage null and void. Well, that may be. So what has to happen? What has to happen is that these people need to approach Congress for a redress of their grievances. Hey, this is the situation. Individuals have lost their benefits if the spouse dies in a different state or have the marriage declared null and void. We have to do something about that. And so you run it through the legislature. That means the House and the Senate, and the president signs it. Okay? That's how you do it. You don't have to amend the Constitution for anything, for everything. If there should be laws that protect abortion in every state of the union, and if indeed, as a matter of fact, Lindsey Graham is trying to get a law that would protect abortion rights in every state of the union. But because there's a limitation in it, then somehow this is some holy Republican the Republican quest to deny women their rights. No, that's not what's happening. No, that's not what's happening. Lindsey Graham is trying to come up with a law that everybody can agree on that would protect abortion rights in the United States. But that's not the way it's being talked about, is it? Not by the president, not by the media. Now, where are you going to hear that anywhere else? I'm sorry, truth spoken here. That's the way I see it. Now, does that make it my opinion? Yeah. Does that make it news? No. It's just what I think. What do you think? You call me. Let's debate. It's the Wells Report. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Telephone number is 817-379-2172, 817-379-2172. So we talk a little bit about the Dobbs decision impacting the way people think about rights or precedents from the court that have lived for quite some time, like same-sex marriage, stuff like that. Okay. And when Langston says, well, if the states have different laws, what about that? Well, that is the transition that we have to go through. That, by the way, can be taken care of not in a court, but in the legislature, which is what the Supreme Court was trying to get done. In other words, the Supreme Court of the United States finally is forcing the House and Senate and President to make a decision about this political issue that will approximate in some way, shape, or form a solution to it. If, say, for example, the Supreme Court of the United States just says, well, we've just created this constitutional right out of thin air because we can, and nobody argues with it for 50 years, okay, then it stands for 50 years. That doesn't make it right. A judicial precedent that's wrong on its face is still wrong, no matter how long that wrong lasts. Did I say how long that wrong lasts? That's what I meant to say. I think I said that, but I'm not sure. That being said, okay, to move forward with this, there will be a transition, but the House and the Senate of the United States needs to figure this stuff out, take responsibility for their decision making, and none of those people in either of those bodies wants to. They don't want to be put on the record over the abortion issue. I mean, for all times and all people. They just don't want to. And if anything comes from the Dobbs decision, if anything comes from it, I hope that's it. I do. This is a terrible topic that has been used to bludgeon the American psyche for decades. It needs to be resolved. And the Supreme Court forced it into the legislative realm where it belongs, where you are represented and people who completely disagree with you are represented. The debate must happen. The votes must be taken. The law must be established. And then people that are bent out of shape because of that law, they must organize and they must throw the bums out of the legislature, start the process all over again, and on until eventually there is a resonance, there is a consensus. And that's what needs to happen. Is it an easy process? No. No, it isn't. It isn't. It's not an easy process. Will there be damage? Yes. Is it regrettable? Absolutely. But is it also the part of the United States as a constitutional republic? Most assuredly, yes. We don't want a federal republic. We don't want a judicial oligarchy. We don't want the secret police. We don't want the regime. We don't want any of this. What we want is a real honest to goodness government that works to the benefit of the American people, that solves problems instead of exploiting problems for political effect. And that is something that we must move forward with. If this is the first opportunity for us to go down that road, I'm all for it. We the people have a country. We only have this country based on our own personal self-discipline, because self-governance requires self-discipline. We simply must pursue this to have the nation that we choose to live in. You have to understand, the Soviet Union was a federal republic. You don't want that. You don't want anything like it. So yes, your politics may have been trampled. That may be a problem. I get it. I understand. It's hard to believe. You think the country's falling apart around you. I understand. It gives you icy gut ball. I know it does me. But living in a state that can create rights out of thin air because of the musings of 9 people unelected by anyone wearing black robes in a very ornate chamber, that scares me almost to my core. I would much rather trust the very messy process of legislation and what comes of that. This is the Wells Report, hour number 2. We've got one more hour to go, so stay where you are because we've got lots more to talk about, including a looming rail strike. Next on the Wells Report. Getting through the news today, it's what we do. Hope you're enjoying it. North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. We bring you the news, the real news, truthfully this time. Well, actually, it's truthful every time, but I can't speak for anybody but this broadcast. And I do so with a certain amount of pride, actually, that we give you the real news. We take that news, we analyze it for fact and bias, we point out each, and we make commentary. Commentary is not news. Not on this broadcast. Everybody else who does this job believes their commentary, their opinion is news. And I say balderdash? I say balderdash. Yeah, then there's debate. And that's where you and I discuss the news, the analysis, and the commentary. And what we hope to end up with is more truth at the end of this broadcast than we have at the beginning. Yep. Somebody said in the chat room just a moment ago, oh, great, a looming rail strike. We're finally getting out back-ordered supplies in, and now we're going to have to shut it down again. Yeah, there's more to it than that. Once again, this is one of those things that has an awful lot of moving parts. So let's jump in. This from the Washington Post. Freight railroad companies and unions representing workers have been locked in a dispute over pay and working conditions. This Friday, the conflict could spill over into a logistic crisis, affecting not only the commuters who rely on the railway to get to work, but also the nation's energy supply and drinking water. While a presidential board has urged a compromise, two of the largest unions, representing 57,000 conductors and engineers, have not agreed to the deal, which could prompt a major strike or the railroads to lock out passenger rail agencies and workers. Today, Labor Secretary Marty Walsh is hosting an emergency meeting of all the rail carriers and unions to help broker a deal. The impasse is tied to disagreements between management and labor over sick time and penalties for missing work, a politically challenging stalemate for President Biden, who aims to advocate for union workers but has prioritized untangling the nation's besieged infrastructure in the COVID era. Here is what you need to know, according to the Washington Post. A crucial issue preventing an agreement is some of the largest carriers' points-based attendance policies that penalize workers up to termination for going to routine doctor visits or attending to family emergencies. Conductors and engineers say they can be on call for 14 consecutive days without a break, and that they do not receive a single sick day, paid or unpaid. All we're asking is folks to be able to go to routine doctor visits without pay, but they have refused to accept our proposal, said Dennis Pierce. He's the president of the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen. The average American would not know what we get fired for going to the doctor. They would not know that we get fired for going to the doctor. This one thing has our members most enraged. We have guys who are punished for taking time off for a heart attack and COVID. It's inhumane. When could the strike begin? Federally mandated cooling off period ends Friday, which could open the possibility of a strike if employees refuse to go to work, or a lockout if the carriers refuse to let workers do their jobs. The nationwide rail shutdown is set to go into effect after midnight on Friday. The Biden administration has already begun preparing for a potential crisis, but the disruptions are already unfolding. Labor and management have been at an impasse over difficult issues such as sick time and penalties for missing work. If the parties don't come to an agreement, the lockout could mark the first such strike in about 3 decades. Been a long time. How might it impact you? Well, hundreds of Amtrak passengers have had their plans ruined after the railroad canceled more cross-country trains ahead of a possible strike that threatens to bring painful disruptions to the nation's passenger rail. You see, you can't get an Amtrak train out in the middle of nowhere just in time for a railroad strike because the train doesn't go anywhere. And it's sitting someplace that it's not supposed to be sitting on, and there is problems that ensue. There are problems that ensue. While we're hopeful the parties will reach a resolution, Amtrak has now begun phased adjustments, the company said in a statement. These adjustments are necessary to ensure trains can reach their terminals before freight rail service interrupts their operations. If a strike is not averted, commuter lines that run between major cities and suburbs could be affected, since those routes often operate on freight tracks, which would not be available to passenger trains. A strike would have significant impact on retailers who rely on freight rails to transport inventory from the ports to warehouses to distribution centers. The shutdowns could cause a domino effect. Retailers will miss their shipping and pickup dates, leaving cargo in limbo with no place to go. This, according to Jonathan Gold, the vice president of supply chains and customs policy at the National Retail Federation. It adds up to ongoing congestion that we are facing within the supply chain. And that all adds to additional costs to folks that have it, that all adds to additional costs, or adds additional costs that folks haven't planned for. Can you say inflation moving upward? Yes. Some railroads are starting to put in place shutdown procedures in anticipation for Friday. Even if an agreement is made before then, it takes time to reverse those procedures. The potential there could be significant on the economy, especially for everybody who's relying on rail for both imports and exports. So, what do we have? Well, once again, we have the wonders of union labor. The president is correct that union labor is very, very good. It is. He was talking about a young woman who had just finished a 5-year IBEW apprenticeship to learn how to engineer electricity. And that is quite an achievement, by the way. She now becomes a journeyman electrician, and she will continue that in search of mastery. At some point, she'll be a master electrician, according to the rules of American labor. There's nothing wrong with that. Unless, of course, you have put all your eggs in one basket, which has not completely happened, but is close to completely happening. Here's how this works. I told you that there are a whole bunch of moving pieces to this, right? First of all, let's start with trains. Trains are really good when they work. You know, you can get on a DART train and go from your house to, or close to your house, to your work, or close to your work. It's a lot harder to drive your own car because there's no infrastructure to park your car. And why not just leave your car at home or in a parking lot so that it can have its wheels stolen and it can be looted? Okay, I probably shouldn't have said that. Anyway, what happens if you can't use one? If, say, for example, there's a transit strike, which happens on a regular basis, well, then you're screwed. That's what it is. So putting your eggs in one basket. That's why any money spent in any major city on mass transit is idiocy. It is absolute idiocy. What you should do is by all means, what you should do is you should build parking lots so people can park their own cars and make sure that the bicyclists that are out there clogging up traffic in major cities because people think riding bicycles is cool, which it isn't. It's actually damn hot, especially when it's, say, for example, 100 and some degrees outside, and you're in a suit riding to work. You're going to be sweaty and stinky. Why would you do that? So keep the bikes off the roads, build parking lots instead of rail. Okay? Well, what about handicapped people that depend on mass transit? Uber. No problems. Or you can create a car service if you want to. But we spend billions of dollars on this mass transit delirium that doesn't work. So there's that. So that's the problem with putting your eggs in one basket. There's another problem. If there's a freight strike, what's going to be there to pick up the slack? Trucking. What's the problem with trucking right now? The price of diesel fuel. So trucks suddenly start taking on a lot more freight. And it's going to be a lot more expensive. And that means inflation is going to go up again. And so that's the problem. Now, why is it going to be so much more expensive? Well, because the Biden administration shut down the Keystone Pipeline and turned off the oil spigots from the North Slope. In other words, he stopped bringing American oil into America. And so what happens? Well, we go to the Saudis and we go to Venezuela and we say, hey, can you give us some oil? And the Saudis go, no. And so the price for diesel goes up. And because now trucks are being forced to do what freight trains normally do, the price of just about everything goes up. This is what happens when you put politics in front of reality. You know, there just isn't a semi-tractor trailer that runs on batteries that can go thousands of miles in a day and recharge in about 20 minutes. In other words, this is all stupid. We are making huge mistakes. We aren't making them. Those mistakes aren't ours. It's our government's mistakes. Well, not everybody in government's making those mistakes. But yeah, everybody in government's making those mistakes. It doesn't make any difference whether they opposed shutting down the Keystone Pipeline. Well, they were in power and the Keystone Pipeline got shut down. Well, there's nothing we could have done about it. Right. There's nothing you could have done about it. Because you, and I'm talking about one political party in general, and you could probably figure out which one it is. You, for whatever reason, don't fight against the other political party enough to actually affect them to change their minds. And then, of course, when you do have the opportunity to make a decision because there's nobody in your way, because the American people voted enough of you into office so you actually have power, you still don't do anything. And so here we are. Looming rail strike. This poppycockian baloney that we need more trains in the United States, not less. Now we can see why that is, stupid. We need more cars in the United States. Efficient ones. Ones that can go for thousands and thousands of miles and refuel in 15 minutes. Those aren't electric. They're not. Fine on a golf course where you can plug them in for a few hours and then take them for one round of golf, but that's not where we are either. This is the Wells Report. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. We bring you the news. We bring you analysis. We bring you commentary. We bring you debate. Every single day, 3 hours from 2 until 5 Central Time, Monday through Friday. Join us. We sincerely would appreciate it. Okay. So we're talking about this rail strike, possibly coming Friday. Senate Republicans want Congress to step in and prevent a nationwide rail strike that could hammer the economy. This from Business Insider. Well, forgive me if I come up with, I don't know, shall we say, the actual honest to goodness accountability that goes with decision making in this country regarding this kind of stuff. But I'm going to. Business Insider writes, as rail workers head toward the potential strike over working conditions, Republicans are trying to force them into a deal. Today, Senators Richard Burr of North Carolina and Roger Wicker of Mississippi introduced a resolution that would enact recommendations from a presidentially appointed panel aiming to resolve the labor dispute. They want Congress to intervene if the unions do not voluntarily agree to the contract by the end of the week and pave the way for wage increases, which, as the Washington Post reports, does not touch on workers' demands to stop being penalized for illness or family absences. There are times and mechanisms that have been in the law for a long time to allow Congress to step in and prevent the economic disaster that would ensue, said Wicker. I think it's time to invoke that provisional law. Wicker said that he was opposed to extending the Friday deadline for a deal. This has been going on for 3 years. John Drake, the VP of Transportation Infrastructure and Supply Chain Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, said in a statement that the chamber welcomes resolution. We need action immediately to avoid a rail shutdown and the economic impacts that would fall on businesses and consumers. The White House has been trying to avert a strike, with the president reportedly calling on both unions and management and the administration to get ready for potential fallouts from a shutdown. Meanwhile, Amtrak has canceled some cross-country routes to head off potential strike disruptions. The workers are angry. A labor spokesperson told CNBC they want movement on attendance policies, and they're not afraid to not be afraid to take a sick day or vacation day without the fear of termination. There will be no ratification unless this is addressed. Okay. And so Republicans are saying, you know, what we need to do is we need to invalidate unions. We need to invalidate the workers' union demands. And the thing about it for me, why? Well, because my God, if there's a rail strike, it could cost the economy $2 billion a day. Right. And who's responsible for that? Well, it would be the president of the United States who loves all these great, big, wonderful union jobs. Union jobs. Union labor. Well, this is union jobs and union labor. This is what you get. Let them go on strike. Let the money be spent. Hold accountable those who are accountable. It's not hard to determine who those persons are. That's what I would do. But it'll damage the economy, John David. What are you going to do about that? I'm not going to do anything about that. I'm going to hold the people responsible for not doing the things required to be able to keep this economy running, even if there is a rail strike. And that would be who? Well, that would be who turned off American diesel fuel at a decent price and American gasoline at a decent price. That's who. Because that's what it comes down to, in my humble opinion. This is the Wells Report. Back in a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172, 817-379-2172. So what I am talking about, or what I've been talking about, is, the possibility of a rail strike. Well, yeah, this rail strike could be a real problem for the economy because freight trains would stop operating. And since gasoline and diesel fuel is hovering around $4-something a gallon, I don't know what diesel fuel is. What's the latest price for diesel fuel? Anybody know? $4.50, something like that, a gallon. So once again, we have real problems with trucking. And by the way, in California, did they ever resolve that mess about California licensed trucks only in California? That was dumb. But once again, who's responsible for that? Well, the same people responsible for the fact that our fuel prices are so high. So now we're in a situation where the freight trains could stop, supply chain gets worse, fewer goods and services, prices go up, inflation is reignited, and the only way to stop it is to essentially stomp all over union labor, which the president extols at every possible opportunity, and say, no, yeah, this is all union labor, but not today. Today you have to do what we tell you. Oh, I see. Is that what the rank and file, who are members of the Railmen's Union, is that what they paid for with their dues? Instead of getting represented, what they're doing is they're getting repressed by the government that their union said that they should support in the last election? Is that the labor experience in the United States? The answer is yes. And because Joe Biden, for whatever reason, just decides, well, we're just going to go to electric cars. And we're going to make people who don't drive electric cars cry out in pain because the fuel prices are going to be so high. Well, welcome to their delirium. Oh, rail strike. Now what do we do? When do we start pumping our own oil, Mr. President? When do we stop playing politics with the essentials of the American economy? At the very basis of all of them is energy, fuel prices. When do we stop playing politics with that stuff? When do you stop bragging about the fact that the Inflation Reduction Act really stuck it to the special interests when you are in it up to your neck with the special interests of climate change swindlers? Climate change swindlers who simply want the government to run everything, including the weather. Right. And so what you did is you said, well, we're just going to blow off American energy, and you did it. Rail strike. Oh, we need diesel fuel at a real price. Oh, my. And guess who's trying to get everything stopped? Guess who's trying to broker a deal? Is it the White House? No. Is it Chuck Schumer? No, because he's too busy working on the next deal to screw over the American taxpayer. Well, who's trying to work out a deal? Why, Senate Republicans. Excuse me? Oh, yeah, we simply have to avert this strike. It could cost the economy $2 billion a day. Yeah, well, if it's going to cost us $2 billion a day and it's the other political team that's responsible, why are you trying to save their butts? Exactly. Because the Republican Party exists to save the Democrat Party from itself. Don't do it. Let the whole thing fall on its butt. Go ahead. Let us make sure the president actually has to live with his policies. Green energy, huh? Okay, let's see green energy get you out of this one. But John David, we won't have stuff on the shelves. Right. We won't have stuff on the shelves. Uh-huh. And the stuff will be more expensive. Uh-huh. You might want to think about that the next time you vote for somebody that is not even inside the suit he's wearing. You might want to listen to people like me who said, if you vote for Joe Biden, you're not voting for Joe Biden. You're voting for the people that run Joe Biden. Who are those people? I don't know. Right. You don't know. They're the presidium. They're the people behind Joe Biden. They're the people that have no problem whatsoever deciding to screw over Americans because, hey, if it goes south, we'll just blame Joe. Yes, they will. And they're doing it right now, in fact. Joe doesn't know what he's talking about. Joe doesn't understand the implications of what he's talking about. He's too busy focusing on his growing up life with corn pop. He brought it up the other day for the party to celebrate the Inflation Reduction Act, which doesn't reduce inflation. It's the Green New Deal. And they were celebrating it with all the greenies. Yeah. And so I say, let them fall on their butts. It will be painful. But who's responsible for it? See, I said that the Biden administration, when their approval rating got below 30%, said, you're going to have to change your policies. No, they did what good liberals do. They doubled down. Okay. So there's no excuse then. What are you going to say now? Those dang MAGA Republicans didn't save our butts and broker a deal between the union and operators of freight trains. It's the MAGA Republic. Yeah. Yeah, shut it down. Absolutely. Shut it down. This is the life. This is the actual honest to goodness country that Joe Biden wants. Or Joe Biden, the purported Joe Biden wants. Whether he's there or not is a matter of conjecture. This is the life they want us to lead. Okay? What do you say? Let's try it out. And when milk and eggs go up another 100% in price, maybe then somebody will say, hey, maybe we should have made a different decision. Yeah, the problem is the past tense in that. You should have made a better decision because the decisions you made have yearly impacts. They go out a long, long way, and it takes a long time to reverse them. If we reversed our energy policies today, it'd be a couple of years before we get any relief. Because that American oil actually has to hit the marketplace. It actually has to hit the marketplace, just like it did when President Trump was in office. When it hit the marketplace, the price of oil went way down. Not because, and they say, well, this is the worldwide price of oil and all this kind of stuff. The world sets the price for oil. It has nothing to do with whether American drills their own oil. Idiots. Just plain idiots. Yes, it does. It's supply and demand. When there's more supply, then the price goes down. Yeah. It's just, these are people that don't belong leading a great nation. And if Republicans keep saving their butts or trying to save their butts, then accountability never comes. And if accountability never comes, then the morass that we live in based on these same political nincompoops and their delirium will continue. We've been laughing at climate change idiots for decades now. And my God, the global warming is going to destroy the planet. I mean, it's just going to get too hot for us to go outside. And I'm going to be making a speech about it next month in Washington, D.C. Well, actually, the speech was canceled because Washington, D.C. is under 2 feet of snow. God has a wonderful sense of humor. I mean, it's just amazing. And so we shut off our energy to please the climate fools. And now we have a rail strike and no diesel to run the trucks. Well, you know, the price of diesel could go down a little bit because those locomotives won't be burning any fuel. Yeah, okay. Sure. No, sometimes you just got to let them live with it. Sometimes you just got to let them live with their decision making. Now, I'm perfectly willing to be talked out of it. I truly am. Is there a better solution? Oh, no, what we do is we just maintain the status quo because, I mean, you know, it's okay to screw over a few railroad workers than destroy the economy. Is it really? Is it really to just ignore the fact that these railroad workers can't go to the doctor under pain of losing their job because they're not available when they get a phone call to go to work? That's a legitimate beef. I know guys that lost railroad jobs over this. Personally. By the way, those guys are in the trucking business now. As a matter of fact, in the trucking business, there's a mandatory doctor visit for you. Why they don't do that with the railroad industry, I have no idea. But this is a long-standing practice. It has to get broken down. And it's going to take more than just something along this line to make that happen. Because the big railroads, they've been able to push their workers around like this for years. That's not going to be something that they're going to be real happy about getting rid of because that means they have to hire more people. Because you got to have somebody that's available to handle a sick leave if you have one. It's so much easier just to fire them. You know what I mean? Oh, you broke your leg? Okay, you're fired. No, that's not the way it should work, is it? It's not the way it works anywhere else. You actually get PTO time, paid time off. You get sick leave. You take all that stuff for granted. But these guys have been hammered with this for decades. They're tired of it. They're ready for something different. And so the government, after supporting union labor, the Biden administration supports union labor, and they're going to try to work out a deal where these guys get stomped for the sake of the economy. Because, well, inflation's bad enough. If there's a rail strike, it'll make inflation worse. Yeah, well, that's what happens, union boss, when you decide that you're going to endorse Joe Biden. That's what happens. You're going to get screwed in the deal as soon as it's politically necessary. Except, of course, you being a union boss, you're not going to have to pay the price. It's going to be the guys you supposedly represent that are going to pay the price. You're insulated. You don't have to worry about it. You get to go home and play with your corgis. How nice. But those guys that are out there coming to work sick as hell, because if they don't, they'll get fired because they don't have paid time off. They get squashed because Joe Biden turned off the energy spigot. And now all the eggs are in one freight train basket. And if the freight trains stop running, well, that puts pressure on fuel. Yeah, fuel we don't have. This is awful. And this is what happened. This is what happened when we elected Joe Biden to be the president. Or Joe Biden et al. ETAL. Yeah. The Joe Biden group as president. Because we know about Joe Biden, but who are the other people? We can guess, but we don't know. They're making these decisions. Joe's the Paschal Lamb, isn't he? He is the scapegoat. He's all laid out on that altar waiting for something to go wrong so that he can be blamed. Isn't that the case? This is the Wells Report. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. So on September 6th, I was talking about the 2020 election. And while I was talking about the 2020 election, somebody complained with the way I was trying to make my point. And in the 2020 election, I asked more questions than I have answers. And what I ended up saying essentially ran afoul of YouTube, shall we say, misinformation experts. I appealed the decision. And what I did was I explained how we do the show. That I do news and opinion, and I differentiate between the two. And when I opine, that is not misinformation. That's simply my opinion, right? That's what I asked them. So what they said is that what happened on the broadcast ran afoul of misinformation regarding the 2020 election, and how there are people out there that don't believe the 2020 election was real. They believe it was rigged. They think there's a problem. Okay. So today I went to YouTube and I looked up The View. The View is on YouTube. You can watch The View on YouTube. That's the ABC News show with liberal women talking about how absolutely horrible anybody who isn't a liberal woman is. Well, Stacey Abrams was on the broadcast today, and one of the hosts praised Georgia Democrat gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams for not conceding her election loss in 2018. Quote, so this is your second run against incumbent Brian Kemp for governor. The polls show a tight race, especially in the poll this morning. When you lost in 2018, you didn't traditionally concede, which I appreciate because you cited voter suppression. Are you confident this will be a free and fair election and not a repeat performance of what happened before? This according to Sunny Hostin. Abrams said she appreciated the framing of Hostin's question. I never denied that I lost. I don't live in the governor's mansion. I would have noticed. And then there's this clip that's going around. It shows me saying that we won. And what I was referring to is we won in terms of communities that were long left out of the electoral process, finally participating in the 2018 outstanding numbers. But I'm not delusional. So just so that's clear, but we do know that the issues that we raised in 2018, the fact that 214 precincts were shut down, that 53,000 people had their vote registrations held hostage, that 1.4 million people were purged, including 500,000 who had simply chosen not to vote, that we were able to tackle that because we raised the issues, because I refused to say that that was a good thing. We saw a response. The state legislature the following year, in response to lawsuits I filed and others, started to fix those problems. What's fascinating is that's essentially what I said about the 2020 election and got called down by YouTube. Now, they were nice about it, and I was nice back. I just explained what we do on the Wells Report, and I'm sure it'll work out fine. But what Stacey Abrams just said about the 2018 election is that precincts were shut down. There were problems with the election, according to Stacey Abrams. 53,000 people had their voter registrations held hostage. 1.4 million people were purged, 500,000 who simply had chosen not to vote. That's not voter suppression, by the way. That is voter apathy. Okay? That's different than suppression. And so what ended up happening is that we were able to tackle that problem because we raised the issues. You see, raising the issues when something goes wrong, even in the face of, shall we say, vehement orthodoxy, is how you solve problems. If you don't allow these problems to be raised, these issues to be brought up and debated, you perpetuate the issue. What we need to make sure of is that our politics don't do our thinking for us. And that, by the way, is a really tall order. But in the privacy of everybody's minds, especially those people that may be reviewing this broadcast on YouTube, I ask you to think of a couple of things. Think about this. Think about Stacey Abrams standing up and saying, yeah, there are problems with the 2018 election. There are these, and these. I did the same thing about 2020. The difference is she's not getting called down, the View's not getting called down, and so on and so on. You need to ask yourself, why didn't Stacey Abrams get hammered for misinformation about the 2018 gubernatorial election in Georgia? Okay? Here's what I'm trying to get across. I'm not trying to slap around YouTube. Okay? What I'm trying to do is this. I'm trying to remind the people involved in all of these discussions that there are points of view that must be raised, debates that must be had, and censorship that must be stopped. A lot of people say a lot of stupid things in public, but that's what free speech is. That's what free speech is. That's why truth and fact are so important, certainly on this broadcast. This has been the Wells Report. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow for 3 more hours of what we do. See you. Okie dokie. And there we go. All right. Okay. Actually, Randy, I was just trying to figure out what you're paying for a gallon of diesel fuel. I understand. I just didn't say. Thank you very much, Ms. Zavon. I appreciate that. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for being around with us. And like I said, I'll see you again tomorrow, okay? Take care, Margie. Good to see you again. Bye-bye. Take good care. As always,